So with us this week is Tony Stella, the illustrator artist extraordinaire. How you doing, man?
Hey guys, thank you for making time and making it so early. I'm a little bit flustered, I must say. I just come stepping off the bike on -degree Berlin bike rides, dropping the kids off to the kid. I'm saying kids, but it feels like more
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
kindergarten and straight to the ice freezing cold studio. But I'm thank you for making time so early.
No, no, man. We appreciate you taking the time with us, man. And I we were talking through email. Like I got a 6 month old, so it's like everything's you got to do everything around your kids, and it's
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's tough. It's tough sometimes, but it's we this is what we love doing. We love film, and of course, the illustration work that you do is all around that love of film, and
Right.
so we appreciate you coming in and talking with us, and we're excited because we haven't had a ton of artists. We had a couple different
right,
graphic designers, and this is you're our first illustrator, because there is a difference there. There is a difference between
right.
people that use the computer more to do their work, and then what you do, which is actually a lot of hands-on, illustrating. So please talk about that distinction and why you do your work that way.
Yeah, you're getting right into the core of everything. The kind of my whole reason for being is kind of we're probably the same age, but kids of the 80s who had learned to do without, were in the VHS era stores. Home recordings first probably came in, and I used to adorn these tapes of mine because I wanted them to look like the real clamshell official releases, which we oftentimes didn't get. But so the next best thing was to, start with the font of Police Academy 4 on the side or something. And you start adorning these tapes, and you copy the obvious guys, and you wish, oh man, I wish I had that Temple of Doom Drew Struzan, but I didn't get it yet, and it's not released. So I started to copy and got in that way. And it was a way for the movies to live on outside of the film that you just watched. And especially in our era that you guys also know well, used to catch stuff off the TV or half seen it. So these films would grow in these mystical dimensions in our minds because you'd catch an ending or something. You're like, did I see this? Then you talk to your friends at the schoolyard, and you're like, no man, he actually kills him with his vision laser. You're like, really? And of course these things got blown up in our minds. But this is sort of to tie our two links together. As we started with the kids, I often feel this intense sadness that I cannot really convey this, the size these movies had in our minds and played a role in our lives, in terms of like not only furthering our play and interactions with each other, but just grow as these sagas in our heads that would come true on paper or on film or in the cinema, or as experiences with our fathers, or watching these films as a family ritual, going to the movies. This has all changed because of the availability. And my daughter's 4, and she's already starting with all the iPad stuff, so their attention span is super super short. And it's not special for her for me to introduce her to something I love. She can take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, she's like, whatever. But at her age, I remember I was blown away by this experience. I was like, I can't believe you showed me this, because it was so rare, right? And so
Yeah.
that was my initial way into this. And like you said, I came into it in also many roundabout ways. I had many careers before this, but the love of movies remained always. And so I always kept drawing, and I built this giant archive over like 30 years of working, which was just movies. And the way I watch movies in general was to sketch alongside of it, and draw and pass in and out of the movie, sort of like have it on in the background. Even when I was working on my big museum shows that I used to do as a proper fine artist, I had a movie on. And so there was a big knowledge of movies and a love for movies, but I never felt I could connect the two. It was always like you had to do something serious for your work, but then the movies was pure. That was like, oh my God, I can let everything go. I'm just like living this grander life. It like lifts you up, it heightens you up, right? The music, this impression of it all. And so I never dreamt of like this could be a career or anything. So when finally one of my other careers just completely fell flat, one of my friends said, there's the internet now. And I was like, wow, the internet, grumpy old me. I was like, no, I don't like it. I don't want to have anything to do with this. And they're like, you should just put your work out there and see what people think. I know you got like drawers full of stuff, and I love this stuff. And the few people who've seen this we used to run a movie theater, and I used to do the posters, painting them live while the movie went on. I'm getting in the weeds
No,
already,
that's
but
amazing.
this is
That's
sort
Yeah,
of
no,
that's
that's
great.
awesome.
this
Yeah.
is sort of the analog ways of what it used to do. It was we used to project. So all my friends were into movies. That was our currency. It was like our discussions, anything we talked about was movies. And one of my best friends, his mom was the distributor for the French movies in Germany, and she was a large distributor for Unifrance. And she basically, you entered their home, and the only thing that was free was the windows and the door frames. Everything else was VHS. It was better than any VHS stores I've ever been to. It's like top to bottom VHS. And that was his mom. And so when we used to come home from doing graffiti or doing anything at night, she wouldn't go, "Hey guys, next day is school." She was like, "Hey, by the way, here's the Antoine Doinel series. You haven't watched Truffaut yet. Go watch this." And this was so much in our circle of friends that we used to watch 5-6 movies a night, just back to back to back, even while sketching on and doing other stuff that we were maybe more focused into, like music or hip-hop or b-boying or whatever we did at the time. These little fads that we had, the thing that was always a current all the way through was the movies. And so when we all sort of grew up, they more or less took different roles as producers. Some did post-production, but we all sort of remained in the field, me the least, actually. And so when these guys got more and more successful, or know how to run projectors, or all these different interesting things backstage of what actually used to get really nerdy about movies and film and shooting our own, as you do with friends, our own, Super 8 movies or VHS, like direct to VHS with these giant camcorders, shoot these backyard movies.
I used to have one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
you cut in the camera, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And make these fun little movies. And they actually started taking these professions. We used to run a movie club, and we'd show, Led Zeppelin's Song Remains the Same about 800 times because we had that one reel. Or we had Slaughter's Big Ripoff, Jim Brown, and we showed that forever because it's the James Brown soundtrack. And so, these used to develop into parties. People bring their girlfriends, and as they got bigger and bigger, it became like a little bit of a cult status in Munich. Because we had Fassbinder's old screen. When Fassbinder's movie theater got torn down, the Türkendolch, which was a famous location in Munich, they happened upon it, and they gave him like a couple of beers, and they're like, "What are you doing with all this stuff?" And they're like, "We're throwing it out. Nobody wants this stuff." And they're really, I mean, like, okay, we take it. And so they had this awesome setup in this abandoned building right in the center of town, and the parties became bigger and bigger and bigger. And I used to, for example, we showed Apocalypse Now, and I did the whole corridor leading up to it. We just stretched this canvas, and I started, and I basically painted live through the movie. And it was kind of very abstract, but also Colonel Kurtz at some point, and giant canvases. And it became like people DJing, and it was a really wild scene. And that was sort of the teenage years. But that got me, I never lost really touch. And sort of, to give it just a little bit of a breather, I did other stuff. And then when the internet came, was basically when I first started on Tumblr. It's like, maybe, I didn't even know how to scan things or take pictures properly. So it was all completely analog. And so I just started taking my pictures, and people started to notice, and there were some articles and stuff, but still very, I just did commercial illustration for airport brochures and parking lots and boredom horror like that. And the movies was always like once in a while, maybe a DVD cover or something, but seldom,
I can tell you that I can tell you this right now. Your teenage life sounds like an amazing story to tell in a film. Like just the so much art going on at the same time sounds so amazing between music and painting and film, and like it sounds like a movie I'd love to see.
Sounds like a lot of freedom.
A lot of freedom. Sorry.
No, I just say a lot of freedom that I don't think a lot of the the younger generations probably don't have now. You know what I mean? You're talking about a time that's so culturally different than the way people grow up now.
Yeah, can you believe our parents just said go to the woods and no way to reach us? They were like, "Yeah, we'll see you when dinner is ready." And you're like, "What?" I cannot imagine with my daughter letting her out of my sight for a second, like in a big town like this. I used to go to kindergarten on the subway. My parents just sent me on the subway. I cannot believe this. I cannot believe that this happened. So you're right. It's almost like it's a completely different life, a completely different culture. And yeah, we used to do wild, crazy stuff. I mean, we got arrested for graffiti like everybody does. We're like pretty hardcore train riders. And so, like, going in the subway tunnels, walking, I mean, like, all this stuff. But in the meantime, it was like I used to do movie characters on the trains and references to movies. So the movies was something I almost never wanted to spoil with real work, because we know, you guys know how it gets. Anything that gets real work becomes quickly like, oh, this email changed that. Boy, pay the taxes. And you're like, ugh. And I saw with some of my friends that worked behind the camera or some, they kind of slowly, it wasn't like, after a while, they were like, maybe not talk about movies after I come off work every freaking minute, because I just dealt with all of this. And for me, because it was connected to art or this kind of freedom of drawing, and my parents just sort of quickly didn't. The reason why I had this freedom is because my parents were completely supportive of all this art. My father was a theater director, crazy, no money, Fitzgeraldo type, like let's build a theater in the jungle and lose, like a guy like that, fascinating guy. But yeah, we used to travel early to New York. So I was in New York in like early 90s, painting graffiti and all this stuff. I was exposed to a lot of stuff and moved around everywhere because they never had any money. So everything crashed and they built something up again. So they're fascinating, fun parents, but super unstable. So it was always like this, while people live with us, actors live with us or not. And so you find your refuge almost in the movies too. That's just a steady, you can return to these actors, you can return to an atmosphere of a movie over time and be sort of safe in that as well. Sometimes I had a giant room, sometimes I had a tiny room, but I always survived with having my couple of tapes with me, or, catching something late on TV. And still to this day, I remember so vividly these impact. Something like we came home late nights from a trip to Italy, and my mom and my dad were like, let's get some Chinese food and watch this new Woody Allen movie, Radio Days is out, let's go. And I caught that. Like, it was so wild to me to go at 11 o'clock at night to catch a movie and get Chinese food. That was so amazing and stayed with me forever. Yeah. Like these things. And I hope to replicate that with my daughter. I just don't think it's going to work the same way. We don't know what's coming yet with all this AI and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a different world we're living in, trying to, and also, I think, like you said, that there was just an unstableness maybe in your your parents' relationship. So maybe that's like why. I mean, that was an organic thing. You trying to force that type of lifestyle is maybe it's not gonna feel the same. And so I think that's, but I like you. I really want to introduce film to my daughter, and hopefully do it in a way that's not going to make her not like it, because that can happen with kids sometimes too. Is you can try to put something on them and they get disinterested and it makes you upset. And I don't want to do that. I want her to maybe watch me a little bit and watch what I'm into. Maybe she'll get into it as well. But speaking of films,
my father was super antagonistic, right? I was watching Rocky, and he's like, he walked by the screen, he's like, Rocky's shit. And I was like, Rocky's shit? You know what shit? Mozart's shit. I said back. And he said back, yeah, Mozart's shit too. And he's like, he was like that type of dad. And he was always like, I when I discovered something wild, some crazy Japanese movie splatter shit, and he was like, you know what? You haven't seen nothing. I watched Jodorowsky's El Topo. Now, if you watch that, then you can talk to me. And this was back in the day when El Topo was like a myth. It was not exist. Yeah. You couldn't watch that stuff. But he had seen that in an old porno theater in the 70s in Florence, and he got blown away. He was from that generation, like very much a Jodorowsky type, and he was totally blown away by by Holy Mountain and El Topo. But never seen them again, never managed to, like we spoke to earlier, never managed to catch up. So in his mind, these were like the best, wildest things he's ever made. And so when I finally saw it, I could finally say, it was always this, like, oh yeah, it's all right, something like this. But there was an antagonistic wink of it. I used to tease me so much because he knew how much I believed in this stuff and like had a passion for it, that it was so easy to get me going on just any topic. He liked Rocky too, but it was just something.
But it was just to create a discussion, to get things going.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's great.
And I got
love
exposed
that.
to everything by him. It's not like, but early on, he was very much encouraging me to take ownership of my stuff that I love. Like, if I liked something that he liked, he was like, you don't have to say that. I know that was maybe boring for you, this Fellini, whatever, don't you? And I wanted to like, oh yeah, that was cool. And he's like, no, don't you take your own opinion. I can. So this was also an atmosphere of watching movies together, but intense moments, watching the entire Bonds together. And he would make these exceptions, like cool things. Oh, it's late night, they're coming on, but school's tomorrow. He's like, no, movies are more important. They're more important than school.
Oh,
This theater, this experience is more
This sounds
important.
exactly like how I want to run my life,
Exactly.
but I won't be able to get away with it with my wife. So
Yeah, my
I
mother was definitely not so happy with that, but she was also, I think I overwhelmed her in general, so she was knocked out by the time we got to doing our thing, I think.
yeah. Well, what I was going to head next was I know some of your favorite films, but tell us about tell us some of the films that really hit you as a child or hit you early on that really have stayed with you up till now that you consider your favorite foundational films.
Right. So I don't make a big distinction with like this is art and this is shit, but I watch everything. Like you said, 80s kids love Stallone, love Arnold, love Rocky. I mean, I still cry at Rocky, so I don't have any of these. And I have some weird ones that get me going, like Richard Lester's Robin and Marion. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. Just I saw it early, and the music just haunts me, and it haunts me to this day. I cry. Sean Connery getting old. It's something about that movie I cannot explain. But so there are these odd ones in there where everybody looks at me is like, how did that hit you? And I have no explanation for those. I just saw them early and they hit me in a way. Of course, all the early Sean Connery, James Bonds, and all that kind of manliness, those movies are all in me. But I also had this crazy experience where my dad showed me, he's like, I forget how it was or whether we borrowed it from something, but it was definitely Seven Samurai. At 6 years old, I watched that and I was a bit standoffish with black and white. I even watched all kind of John Wayne. We had a black and white TV for God's sakes, forever, watching old Monday night westerns and stuff. But I was still like, oh, really, a black and white movie and stuff? And they're like, no, you're gonna like it, samurai, it's swords and stuff. And I was like, okay. And that movie came on, and I was never the same after that. I mean, it was a level of artistry, storytelling, performance that I could never even put into words what that movie meant to me, and then unlocked a kind of world of Japan that till this day I hold it to the highest. Japanese cinema is the best that ever was, that golden age from the 50s to the 70s. It's just something in me that I'm endlessly digging. I'm endlessly, I'm doing this for 30 years really professionally, and I'm still finding new things that I can't believe are not released in the West for the first time coming out, and I'm really pushing hard. So my love for Japan is sort of at the very core of my movie love. And this is something also that I could call my own, I think, because it didn't translate to my friends. They hardly knew this stuff. My father was sort of, he knows maybe Ozu, Mitsuguchi, and Kurosawa like everybody does, but that was it. And I could, by little digging, I found like things that spoke to me in such a crazy way that it was really my own thing. It was really something I could call my own in the midst of all this, art house that I hadn't seen yet, or maybe even the crazy, horror was never, for a lot of people, horror is, I found, especially for American friends I have, a lot of the outsiderness was the entryway into movie love, and kind of cinema as a horror entryway. You watch things that are kind of forbidden. You watch like Dawn of the Dead, and you're like, wow, this shit is awesome. Like, who are these guys making it? Sort of an indie flavor to maybe I could make this. So horror was never big for me, but maybe only really the 70s classics. But I think this is sort of I have a wide range of tastes, and I still like to be discovered. But the older I get, the more I'm like, there's definitely thresholds for me where I zone out. Like I don't have hardly anything from the 90s. I mean you probably a couple maybe, but I don't know. I also, till this day, and into the work I do, the people that call me for modern stuff, I'm always, did you guys check my work? Because I rather do like a forgotten old movie, because I can watch it. I can get into the camera. So many things that you mentioned early that disturb me about the digital look of things, digital comics, paper. I got out of comics because it looks so bad. I can't get over it. And so I don't care about the story. I just can't get over that glossy look, the non-haptic quality. And the same thing about the camera today. When I watch these movies, something about the shininess and that new quality takes me out of it completely. So I'm definitely a 50s, 60s, 70s guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like, an interesting foundation of just, influences that kind of stayed with you throughout your work. Because if a lot of people go and check out your work, which, if you're listening, you can check it out on Tony Stella.com, and it has just a list of all of your, all of your work, all of the, the posters that you've done, all the cover art that you've done with a lot of these different boutique labels that we've talked about here on the show so many times. And I kind of wanted to like maybe transition into like how you got into doing the cover arts for a lot of these companies, and
Right.
how did they kind of contact you? Did you contact them, and how that process goes?
Well, it's one of these really frustrating things that everybody in every career comes on early. How do you get your foot in the door? How do you get, and you see other work and it kind of really upsets you. You're good on yourself and you can be philosophical about it, but then you see other covers that come out and you're like, I can't believe, why isn't Criterion calling me for this? Like, I can't believe. So you start to, two things start to happen. Luckily, I've seen this in my other careers. I got bitter. I got really bitter, and it influenced my entire life, my relationships, my circle of friends, and I just became the bitter guy. And I thought it was everybody else's fault. And I kind of had this dark cloud around me, and I entered every party, and I was like, why didn't like? And I finally dawned on me after years of failing, which is an important part of it, and something maybe that this generation is a little bit. It's a shame that they have to put everything online right away. Then there's no space to fail. I failed for 30 years, and nobody got to see it. So the archive you build is like what I put out. Like you said, that website, that only is the tip of the iceberg. That's 10% of what I did. But the other stuff, it remains for me to, sometimes you just rediscover things, but still there's this great vacuum of things. And so I think I greatly benefited that this wasn't my first avenue to do things in. I really, really failed hard in the fine arts world because I did not understand that simple trick that dawned on me later. That was, I was always disappointed that people I didn't respect didn't invite me to do things. And that's but it took me years to understand. I was like, you don't like these people, but yet you want them to adore. And I thought it was clever enough or charming enough to not let them know, but it does come through. After a while, it does come through, and just your being, and you carry that shit with you. And so I think with the DVDs or the movies was just like, I'm so passionate about this. I do this without any money. I don't care. Like, you can't stop me. This is something I did already with no money. So for labels or other things, I think that's always a very attractive thing. Like in a relationship, when you don't look for them, they come to you. When you desperately fall in love or something, you can never get them, right? So it's like for me, it was like, I think there's a sense of people like, oh yeah, if we ask him, he's happy to do it, but he doesn't need us. I'm not desperate. I'm not sending portfolios. I'm not begging. I don't care. And so here's just what I do. And it served me really well. And I must give a big kudos also to a lot of the people who work in this field, is that very opposite to the art world, where it's always like these gatekeepers who are like, oh, maybe if this person likes it, then maybe we can let you in to be seen that this guy it's very complicated, very political. Whereas with movie people, or even behind the scenes, or producers or labels, or even official films, they're like, let's get this done. This is a huge collaboration. Let's get this done. There's certain deadlines, there's certain facts. And yeah, if the gun facing the audience is not a thing on the poster, I can quickly get over it. This is not an attack on me. These are simple sales facts and simple regulations, and I can get over that. And for me personally, self-analysis again is probably something that dawned on me recently, because I was a graffiti writer for so many years, and because in graffiti you never go up to the, and you don't make it about yourself. You are very quiet, and you let the work that you do at night illegally speak for itself. And there's a great satisfaction when that enters the world, and when other people talk about it, and you're kind of standing. I had that oftentimes where I stand at the train station, the train comes in, people talk about it, oh man, did you see this piece, what a burner and stuff, and you just stand there very quiet and enjoy. And that's much more my personality. And in the art world, it was always like, you got to sell yourself, you got to go out there and market yourself and be this guy, and always either you're too wild, or you're too coy, or you're not like this, I was never right for my paintings, for how I presented myself. And I really enjoy being in service of something as an illustrator rather than an artist, of like, I'm in service of the movie. I'm in service of the people who made this work already. So I come in at the very end when people have done, months and months of work of cutting and editing and blood, sweat, and tears. And they're like, give it to this guy. And if I tank it, like their whole first impression to the audience out there is ruined. So I feel an obligation of making it work for them and also finding a best solution for them. And that sometimes means that I have to override them and say, no, guys, actually, I know what I'm talking about. This would look awesome. Let me show you this. And I usually don't mind putting in the extra work. I'm always happy to go and show them my vision. And that often breaks down too, and it says, no, we don't want it. And you kind of then you resort to a B level where it's more, okay, you're not getting a Tony Stella poster. You're getting I'm illustrating your poster. But I still find the satisfaction. And if they're happy, I'm happy. It doesn't have to be, my absolute my best work out there. It's fine. If they're happy, I'm happy. And like you said, in the digital age, or sort of going back to this, being able to have a portfolio that's like out there standing in the world, you're able to have a little bit more control. It used to be that, I have to pack up my original gouache paintings, and then there's a giant folder, go to every agency in New York and open it up, and they just having coffee, and they're like, who's this idiot? Like, I don't care. And you're like standing there all like sad in the rain with your work. And like this, I can let people see it in Japan. I can see people have it in China, and they have an impression and an idea about it, and it kind of gestates in the culture already without me having to knock on every door. So it's kind of a convalescence of all these different factors that came in through my personal development and life. And I was just very lucky, like it always is in the end of the day. Like you said, it was a lucky, if my friend hadn't said, put it online, I wouldn't have probably done it. And if I wouldn't have, my wife wouldn't have pestered me with her in Twitter, I would have never gone on Twitter. And, I'm always happy where I am. I was happy with VHS. I don't want DVDs. Then finally somebody said, but there's all these extras on DVDs. And I'm like, okay, maybe get a DVD player, but leave me here. And they're like, okay, now we get all this other new stuff, Blu-ray. And I'm like, okay, I'm happy. I already have my thing. I'm cool. Let me be, and I will work till the end of the day. I'll never have a downtime, because if you give me a break, my ideal holidays is like working on movies. It's not like sitting by the beach.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you get super obsessed with what you love. And so
Right.
you kind of shields you from a lot of other things, intentionally, somewhat unintentionally, but it's like it keeps you, really, I think, good at what you do. Because I think, especially recently, there has been a profound amount of your work that's being used on a lot of these releases. I think, I mean, I have a lot of the releases that have your work on it, but the one that I remember kind of really noticing first, that's one of the good ones there. Was the Thriller release from Vinegar Syndrome was a really good one that I just thought just popped off the shelf and off the screen. And yeah, I think there's just been since then, I feel like just tons of
so
stuff coming out.
So what's so awesome, as you're pointing out, is a variety. This is also something that was never allowed in the fine art world. In the fine art world, you become the guy and you make these works, and they say, how many can you produce of this type of work? That's a reliable output that we can control. Of course, the best guys never did. Picasso changed till the end of his life, but still, if you get early into the gallery system, this is what they want from you. And I always enjoy, or this is something where I break a little bit with my love for the masters, a little bit, the Drew Struzans or something, because he did use the same style for Police Academy as he did for Indiana Jones, as he did for a comedy. I mean, it's a Drew Struzan painting. They're awesome, but I would always want, my personal thing was this changing. If I make a movie from the 60s, and that's also because he did current movies. I'm jumping around in the era. So if I'm doing an Italian comedy from the 50s, I'm not going to use the same style as if I do a 80s action movie. And I love changing up these styles for all these different labels who have all these different flavors. If we're talking Arrow, if we're talking Eureka, if we're talking Vinegar Syndrome, they have very different people working there with their own history of movie love and producers who come in with their takes. So they're developing different projects. They have access to different worlds. And all of a sudden you're in a conversation and a collaboration with these disc producers that is super intense and cool often, because a lot of them are like, do what you want. and others are like, we would like to see this very much. And so being able to change these things up on these short projects is awesome. And this is sort of a change also why you see more work now, is because the pandemic obviously ruined the theater. As I finally arrived in doing theatrical one sheets, the whole movie industry died. And I'm like, oh, great, now here we go. And therefore the labels have, increased their volume of work. And I'm getting to a point where I'm even like, putting some feelers out where, like, guys, this would be awesome. Nobody's ever touched this. And so there's some things coming out that I've been working on for 20 years, and it's nobody ever wanted to hear. But because now I'm finally understanding a little bit how these things are released, I'm losing also a lot of the anger that I used to have about releases, where I'm like, oh, is this art is horrible, and this guy, and how is it coming to be released like this? But you see, when you're behind the scenes, like, oh, they're having mandates to work from. They're having very difficult rights issues with Toei is not releasing the rights because this would be the act, and they want to release something on their own. So great projects I've been working on for a long time get all of a sudden dropped, because now there's not so much Japanese flavor in the moment. The last 2 discs haven't sold so well. So we're not doing the Hideo Gosha run that I had in my retrospective mind that we need to see out there. And so it's been the most fun, I think, even more fun than doing what I love to do is like big posters still for retrospectives or movies that have come out, but less and less of the stuff I love is coming out. So it's been much more fun to go back in history and say, like, what would I do for my take on, like, a super classic, or even get the eyes on the Western audience for, of course, the Japanese movies that I love.
Yeah. I think it's also good that, I think what seems like working with the labels can do for you is it's an interesting challenge, because when you're collaborating like that, and you're trying to understand what they want, but also trying to stick true to what you do, that creates in itself something unique. That's not maybe completely Tony Stella, but can also it be something really different than what you've done before, because you're getting outside influences where most of the time you've kind of almost, like I said, isolated yourself in a way to what you like and what, and that's your influence, but when you're working with somebody else, it's like you're trying to make them happy. So you're taking a look, and then that can be detrimental sometimes. But I think in this case, you seem to hold your values pretty strong and don't let it completely get away from you to where it's not yours anymore. And that you can still feel good about it at the end.
I walked away from many, many projects, and I think I have that aura about me now that people notice that you can push me to a certain degree, and I always want to make things work. And oftentimes notes have made it better. I'm not never would, and I always say it's not the lack of talented artists, as we can see through Instagram, that's out there. There's so many insane people working today in all kinds of media. But it's the lack of good art directors. And this is something we're missing a lot. And you used to meet these very cultured people who had a very big reservoir of cultural impact, theater and music, and they could draw from all this. When you get a shorthand with them, when you talk to somebody, they would pull, we wanted to look like this, we wanted to look like this. And that's always my biggest outcry was, it's not like the lack of talent, it's the lack of this communication often, that for movie posters especially, where they want you, but then the notes are detrimental to everything that you stand for. And you perceive this very early on, especially if you got your feelers alerted, you've done so many projects, that you go like, guys, this is going in a bad direction and you're not going to be happy with the results. And they're like, well, we want you to try this. Why don't you try this? And I'm like, I can do it, but we're getting into time. There comes time to release a stand in it. I'm hand painting these things. I'm fast, but still we're going off on a completely different thing. I think there's better guys. And I often recommend other guys that they should rather work, because even after I've just dumped a gigantic project that I worked on for 3 months, and I lost so much money, but it was getting to such a bad place with them revealing certain issues that I asked for specifically in the beginning, and they're coming out like, oh, but it doesn't have the tie-in. And I'm like, well, we never mentioned this tie-in. And there's very many unexperienced people who want to, especially they're used to seeing like 1,000 options on the computer, right? Like 1,000, even now with AI, you can just spit out a thing and prompt it and you get 50 posters, and they go, oh, take a little bit here, take a little bit there, take a little bit of this. And this leads down a very dark path where they think if you hire like a proper old school Illustrator, you can just like do 50 versions and we'll pick the best, and then we'll have it combined into another thing. And this is often where I have to write this big introductory letter of kind of saying, being very polite and being very in the beginning, obviously collaborative and don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I have to go like, this is the process, guys. Like, I love to let the movie wash over me and react to it directly on paper or canvas, but I don't like to do 8,000 sketches. It locks me up, it ties me down, and I just feel like I have to just fulfill sort of an outline. But oftentimes for the big projects where, movie campaigns are running in the millions now, and the movie is often the cheapest part of that, even though it has a great impact. And they want to see, 50,000 sketches. And eventually it's like, even the people on the floor plan, every intern, their moms have an input on the movie. And they're like, what are we doing? Too many cooks. We're talking to, everybody has an opinion. We're taking this apart before it even happened. And so I often like to go directly work right away and present them with almost like 90% finished poster, because then we can talk. Then we can say, oh, I don't like green. But if you saw them a pencil sketch, they're like, is this going to be like at the top? Is this going to be really gory? And I'm like, yeah, don't worry. It will be. So I find sketches completely useless unless it's about placement, and a lot of actors have contracts where Nicolas Cage's head has to be 10% bigger than the co-lead, and there's very strict rules about everything. So in that case, you have to go through a sketch process. But my ideal process, and why these DVD releases are fun, is that you can sort of show a lot of angles of a movie. You can see front to back, you can pull something out, there's something on the inside. So even if you don't have one major scene that needs to be encapsulated in one poster, you kind of get to do a lot of cool impressions that move about. And that's sort of my favorite releases that I was, of course, like you guys can probably tell, crazy vinyl collector. And while I listen to the music, I love to hold the artwork in hand and kind of look at the liner notes or probably the gatefold and open it up and see all the artwork that's inside. And that's part of the feel of these objects. And yeah, there's been a great renaissance of not only when everybody called the DVDs dead and the Blu-rays dead and nobody's collecting these things. I recently got into a big discussion with some of my best friends on Twitter, movie lovers, nerds, and they were like, well, you're not preserving film culture by buying DVDs or Blu-rays. And I'm like, yes, you do. Yes, you do, because often not only you're preserving interviews or hard to see movies, you're also getting new artwork for it. You are creating a new object that hasn't been in the world. It hasn't existed like this before. Forget all the amazing features these producers pull out now, new interviews, new sites, new better sound quality. And so these movies, especially on some of the Japanese ones, would be completely forgotten. And they're like, pure, if it's not in the theater, it's not a movie. It's like, guys, I don't know. I'm coming from the inside out, and I'm telling you, the amount of work that people put into this are museum level shows. Whether that shows up always is another question, but there are very, very many talented people involved in these releases. And I'm so grateful that there is an audience, that these movies are getting re-released, getting another take. And another look, and yeah, that can be part of it. And it's a huge honor. I mean, I could never believe last year was like, I worked for Tatsuya Nakadai, my favorite actor of all time.
Me too. I love him. One of my favorite films is Harakiri. His performance in that is amazing.
Yeah, he's my movie god, so to speak. And so I'm like one level removed now from Kurosawa, which for me, I could have never. How did this happen? He was on stage. He's almost 90. He turned 90, and he has a long running theater company that he used to run with his wife, and he performed in Noto Peninsula, and it's an incredible theater that opens the entire backdrop at the last scene, and all these paper balloons come on. It's a police story. It's Inn of Evil by Masaki Kobayashi, another great movie, and his wife adapted the play. And he's had many performances over the years, and sort of for the last run, I did the poster for him, and I had direct notes from him about the poster.
Wow! So
this is something that enables, all of a sudden, now we're communicating with people. I always felt I had a communication with Kurosawa already, whether he was dead or not. It didn't matter, because I'm doing this exchange that I'm translating his vision into another medium, there's already a conversation. But when you all of a sudden you're really getting notes from people that you are held as deities in my world, then it's all of a sudden entering a completely surreal level of like pleasure, and money and all that stuff doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah, when you can do what you love, that it doesn't even matter anymore. But to get a little bit more deeper into your illustrations, to explain to people what style of artistry you're using. What are your you're doing oil pastel. You're doing oil pastels. You're doing
everything. Yeah. So because I'm such an analog guy and I come from such a weird different field, I wasn't taught in anything. I went to art school briefly, but it wasn't for me. It was a lot of that stuff. And so, but it was all these materials were always provided from my parents on. So everything was available that I wanted to try. But what you get in your teenage years, when you kind of lock into the graffiti world, you become sort of self-reliant in lots of ways, not only finding the ways and means to paint, but even like modifying spray paint markers, filling your own ink. So you do a lot of things that traditionally, if you go down the traditional route, you're not allowed to do. You're painting on surfaces with materials that not go together. And so my thing is a complete mixed media approach. It's like, I use oils with watercolors, and people go like that, you should never do that. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know. But I love that surprise, that the effect can still surprise me. I think otherwise I would be bored. Like I said, if I do a million sketches and just fill the little colors out, I feel I'm not surprised anymore. And so that's why I often have like 5-6 takes on a poster, because I sometimes come back, I'm like, oh, I found a new cool idea to draw something else in a different style. So I use oil paint, I use anything you give me, and usually pretty cheap stuff. I never had really good stuff. And recently I found like a set of pretty expensive oil painting brushes, and I used them for the first time. I'm like, oh my God, this is a pleasure. I can't believe I was doing this with these, these radiator brushes, like super cheap. And I was like, it worked fine, but I'm like, this is why people get these blends. Oh my God, everything, this is easy. Like,
what a revelation.
A revelation. So I enjoy jumping around. I'm enjoying having little projects that allow me to try out some wild stuff. I got a new Vinegar Syndrome coming out next about some crazy Mexican wild movies. And yeah, I'm doing crazy new stuff for that. I'm looking forward to that. And Vinegar Syndrome is awesome. They're letting me do whatever I want. Like, they're like, yeah, do it. That's awesome. I never had a note, I think. So
yeah, they're like that. They're very open-minded. They got, all them partner labels. They bring in tons of different facets of film and just filling up the world with more and
often
more
they're
Blu-rays.
too wild. Like, see Righting Wrongs. I'm like, who did all this work? I'm like, I'm seeing the release. I'm like, there's like 4 more artists on this. I thought I was the only one. So, but that's also a pleasure where I'm like, okay, cool. I don't know, mixed. It's wild, but that's fun to where you get to switch to the next label, and they're very strict and they're very pared back, and that's also cool. But yeah, I'm intensely grateful for that. But in terms of making them, I really go, most of the classics you don't need to show me. Like, often they would go like, oh, we were thinking about this movie, we're sending you a link. I'm like, what link? I know this, I can start right now. I have it in my mind, it's already playing in my head. I and even the far out of the way, like crazy wild martial arts stuff, there was a phase in my life when I was super into the Shaw Brothers and all that stuff, so I know all of that. And yeah, I have a crazy library, not only in my head, but also of stills and of crazy rip files in the early days of torrents, where we just went and exchanged. Everybody was like, yeah, man, that was a wild time. It was a wild internet where first it connected us. You can never talk to these movie freaks. You were like, all of a sudden it was like, we used to meet at film conventions or something, and you would get like these bootleg copies of stuff, because labels still to this day, it's a hard talk to get labels to release some of the best stuff. Rights issues, obviously, but yeah, first of all, there was a passion that you exchanged, and that led to everything else. And I think that's the great thing in the film community, that you talk to a lot of people who are also crazy passionate about it, or there's a reason behind the release already. It's very seldom like, oh, a lot of martial arts movies are being released and making money, so what can we dig out? It's usually like, oh wow, Yimbeho is all of a sudden doing crazy. Like, oh, there's many great movies. Like we don't have to just do Warriors 2 and The Prodigal Son. There's more. And so I was a big proponent of the 80s, like Hong Kong action cinema that's now gone, past and gone, will never be repeated. Something so glorious that we had for 10, 20 years that was never to be repeated. And so to be able to go back and then shine a light on this, help people rediscover it, and that's an awesome satisfaction. That's like I often go in and I just make these films straight up. I go straight into drawing. I don't do any underdrawing or sketching. I go straight in. If it doesn't work, I throw it out, but I start again. But I want to have this immediacy of watching the movie, being in the movie. My wife hates this. Like sometimes we watch something together and I'm like drawing and she's like, you're not paying attention to the movie. I'm like, yeah, but
that's hilarious. Hit your version is our version of most people is like you're on your cell phone while you're watching a movie, and it's like you're over here with a sketch pad over. That's hilarious. I love that.
Well,
unfortunately, the phone is a real thing too now. Yeah,
is it?
Yeah.
When inspiration strikes, you kind of have to, jump on it right away, or you may lose it, or you may not remember. How many oftentimes does that happen to people?
Yeah, that metaphor of riding the wave is a real one. It's like you riding that crest. It's coming in the set of 7, and you're like, I'm gonna catch this one because there's a mood, there's a letter, there's a phone call. Your mom's giving you back conscience, and I was like the daughter, and you're out of it. It's quick, and you have to really put on the blinders and not think about the daily grind and sort of. And that's why most artists work at night when everything quiets down in the studio. I work best at 3 a.m. I watch 2 or 3 movies to charge me up, or even while I was working, just watching something else. And all of a sudden you get into the mood of, I want to do a Japanese sniper movie, or something like nobody knows. And are there these current themes this is another thing about watching movies. I don't know what happened to you guys, but you find out so much about yourself in your taste. I'm like, why am I attracted to these things? Oh, this is just completely me. This locked in early in my psyche somehow through movies, not through my parents or your immediate surroundings, but through movies, because it was such a high currency for us.
Yeah, there's a lot. We try to talk about that on here a lot. Is how we watch movies these days, and a lot of people are not watching them with a lot of thought. They're trying to lose their thought. And what you're saying here is that you can create a relationship with a film that you haven't seen, by actually watching it, taking in what's happening, and if you're liking it, or even if you're not liking it, you can learn something about yourself through what you don't yet like or don't like in that film, and it's a growing experience.
Totally,
it's a great thing film can give you if you let it happen. But if you're only if you have expectations, you're only allowing yourself to enjoy the movie on a certain level, then you're not going to get everything that it can give you. And just like limitations in making things, like you're talking about. I think film creation of art also has kind of an opposite effect, where I think how you work as an artist and how a lot of great art is created is where there is limitations.
Yes, true.
And so there is a cool, interesting back and forth between the viewer and the person creating it. The creator, a lot of times with the limitations, creates even better art than with having an open field, when as a viewer, we have to be as open-minded as possible and try to see what they were trying to say. And sometimes the artist doesn't even know what they're trying to say. They just, through their own selves, make something that means something that's part of who they are. And I think that's why limitations can sometimes be a great thing, is that it just comes out of you. Just like you sketching on a pad while watching a movie,
limitations can lead to innovations. I think we've seen that a lot throughout the history of cinema, specifically the further you go back, and the further you do the history about the restrictions of filmmaking, like the Hays Code or the MPAA or things like that, and things you couldn't put on screen versus things you could put on screen. So you had to code things, you know what I mean? You have to put in hints and kind of hidden meanings and things like that. I think a lot about that when it came to the sexuality on screen, whether it be sexual identity, whether it be sexually charged scenes between whichever characters. You had to kind of hide those things because of the limitations of the time. And it's fascinating how that kind of, permeates throughout other forms of artwork, whether it be music, whether it be, painting and sculpting and all that kind of stuff. It, all of that kind of limitations has always kind of been there. And it's kind of within art has had to kind of hide itself, but in a way, hiding itself, it's almost kind of, become more interesting.
Right.
And
If we find a creative solution about showing somebody's head explode or a sexual scene, and it's often hidden in our heads because they couldn't show it, or why is the dialogue so sparse because they couldn't shoot with the sound, and therefore we experience movies in a bigger way than if it's over talked, overwritten.
Yeah, one of the greatest examples is Steven Spielberg's Jaws. That movie was
Right.
supposed to have a lot more shark in it, and the limitations of that shark created less shark. And what is it now? It created the blockbuster. It
Right.
kind of propelled cinema in a certain direction. Some people look at that negatively now, and I think I agree somewhat. But that movie's fantastic. Jaws is an amazing movie, and because we saw less shark, it helped create that limitation. Created something more horrific in our mind that we would have been ruined if we would have saw that rubbery shark more.
Or why we see his buddy George, why Star Wars worked in the first three, because it was a limitation of the space looked dirty, it looked like used, it looked authentic, it looked real. And as soon as you get to have running them around in green screen in any kind of environment, you lose everything, more than the performance, more than the story that we're even telling. There's like you said, there's a haptic quality baked into it that we are not analyzing. Like you said, the artist doesn't even know it's there. And when they later try to fix it or make it more like Empire, make it more, that's not the issue, guys. It's just because the Yavas were dirty and had little rags that that were from the costume department, and it looked real. We could dive into it. And it's interesting about the viewing habits today, because I don't know whether it was this for you guys, but when you revisit like these childhood loves, it has such a great impact on you. Often it's very disappointing, but more often than not, I find now that I give a lot more leeway to things I used to absolutely hate from a certain time. I saw what they were doing. It failed maybe, but it somehow grows. These failures grow a little bit grander than maybe the perfect movies now. I love like these things, or I think that's the fascination we have with these making offs, like Dune, Yorovsky again, like where wow, this was almost like wow, or even David Lynch Dune, which I don't like, but now you're like wow, I love that movie, like because you see so much of the creative that fed into it, and why it failed is also evident. It couldn't work, but now it's a complete work of art that somehow was like a theater performance, and it's so much more heightened and more special therefore than whatever the new thing is.
How many times do you hear about the making of a film being so chaotic, and then the movie ends up being extraordinary? I think of, like you mentioned earlier, Apocalypse Now notoriously had one of the most tumultuous making ofs ever. They made a whole documentary on it.
It's
which
a
some people may
disaster on
prefer.
paper, right?
Like Hearts of Darkness is the documentary, the making of, and some people like that more than the actual movie. And it's kind of like that, just that chaos, and then kind of working that magic of artistry, creating an extraordinary film out of that, is just one of those things that you can't really predict it, and you can't manufacture that. Like that just happens in the moment.
Kubrick always said is like trying to make a movie is trying to write War and Peace in bumper cars. It's and you almost see it heightens each other, like you said, through that Sophia Coppola, through that Hearts of Darkness document. It heightens the movie now. Things that maybe you thought were boring, like the French colonial scene. Now you see what took it to light it, and that it ended up on the cutting room. And now you give yourself over to these scenes where you're like, I saw what it took to get there to make this, and they become really special. And almost always want like a making of Blade Runner Dangerous Days, on the DVD. That's like 5 hours. I cannot get enough of this. I want it longer. I want it much longer. I don't like the short content.
Yeah, and that's why we pushed physical media so hard, is because if only people could get into the contextual material around these films, they might appreciate a lot more stuff, and they might be interested in a lot more stuff. But people only they're only pass. A lot of film watching is a lot more passive these days. They're doing it in between their hard day's work, or they're doing it in between taking care of their kids, and it's just not on the
And
same
that's
level.
an interesting crossroads that you mentioned. That's really, maybe it's become clear to me, for like all the materials could really be the replay. Because I despair a lot of times. I'm like, how are we ever going to get this passion back? But you're right. That could be somebody's way into, like, movies used to mean so much to us because they were so rare. And now that they're so available, I'm always like, yeah, but that's why they become a dime a dozen. Nobody cares. But if you ever, get exposed to these, you would catch a lot of these people in a journey of their own, being despaired with their families, having to deal in the jungle with the thing, and having to do, and seeing the making of what it took to get a performance out of somebody, or failing at something that then creates another avenue that becomes really special. That's that's a huge opportunity. And also what I see in the making of these box sets, or sometimes that you get to, now you have an occasion to shine a light back onto often forgotten creators, especially in Japan, that are just really leading regular lives in the meantime. And you come in as an outsider, praising and appreciating them. I got a lot of love by the original makers of those movies and actors, because they saw that I took time, and I saw something in the movie they had put in there years ago, or in their youth, and they could now see that reflected, and you get awesome messages. I'm friends with the son of Makoto Sato on Twitter. The son just wrote a book about his father, and he's really involved in preserving films. And all of a sudden he wrote me, he's like, thank you for drawing my father. And I'm like, what? I can't believe that. I can't believe this is my hero. Like, how I'm all of a sudden like in that world through just a piece of artwork, or through through social media. And I find in general, people just malign social media a lot. And I can see that if you follow only politics, how you'd lose your mind. But if you follow the creative film community, there's so much passion and exchange and friendships and podcasts like you guys. There's a whole community that you create through a passion and love of something that is actually now being realized, and it's making real things happen. That's something that I'd completely discounted at the beginning of like going online. I was like, oh, it's probably a bunch of blah blah blah, and I only met cool people, really.
Right.
I mean, there is the blah blah blahs out there.
I was going to say there are a lot of people who are not, I wouldn't say bad movie fans or bad film fans, but there are a lot of people who are difficult to deal with, I would say, online.
Right. I had friends that fall into that Scorsese Marvel discussion, and they're like, oh God, let me out of here. I went down the wrong pathway here.
There's a lot of, especially when it comes to kind of, I've been noticing this a lot lately when it comes to a lot of the labels and things like that, a lot of gatekeeping. Right. You know what I mean? People who are like, oh, this is not a title that this company should release, because this company should only release this type of movie or something like that. You get a lot of that lately, and it's kind of, and I've been saying this like ad nauseum. It's like we're getting so much now that just wait a little bit, because something's going to come out that you like, something's going to come out that you want, something's going to come out that you, I guess, quote unquote approve of. It's just you just relax. You know what I mean?
But you don't have to put your negative thoughts out there about something that you're not into. Like, it's
and if a company doesn't release something you don't want, then don't buy it. You know what I mean?
Right. It's hard. I don't want to seem like I'm above this. My wife has stopped me from many horrible tweets where I would have been canceled for easily. But it's just because in the moment you should take a step back, and that's where the phone becomes a problem, because I've been enraged by horrible stuff I see. But this is maybe where I think the art director discussion that we had a little bit is what's a shame is that these people are not more vocal. Because if you see the thought and ideas behind a lot of these, not just the creators, not just me, the cover artists or the people behind the movie, but actually the people who put this sort of stuff together, those are interesting people with their own thoughts and ideas and own families at home, and they are very specific thoughts and often a huge passion for movies behind them. And yeah, you might not sort of be in their flavor of movies, but a lot of other people are. And then other people, I've worked on stuff where it just completely went wrong and nobody's happy. But if you saw that we all tried, you would feel compassion for us, because we worked for 4 months on it, and in the end nobody was happy, and it was just sort of like a relationship that didn't work. It was nobody's fault at the time. We all met at the wrong thing for the wrong project. And I often got like somebody a sweetheart of a producer that I love, that gave me some of my first jobs. She called me and she's like, you should do this romantic comedy that's like, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't like anybody in it. And I don't know if I can do a good job for you, is usually how I get out of these things. I don't want to be rude and I would like to help everybody. And they're like, no, because they want to see, they love your work, and sort of like, and everything they named was already a red flag. You're like, yeah, but this is a huge action movie with lots, and you're asking me to do this really like, cutesy little thing. And not that I can't do it, but I was just, it's not for me. I can tell that's not for me. And then we worked forever on it and tried really hard. And I think I did some good work, but ultimately the creators were like, this is not what we want. And you're like, wow, that was a huge waste of time. And I could let that boil over into anger and think, because I had, raised all those red flags. But ultimately you saw that she tried, I tried, it's not for them, so you have to step away from it.
That's why it's important for you to stay true to yourself, because you're the one that has to do the work. And if it becomes work, and it's not that fun thing that you love and that passion, then it's just going to end up being a waste of your time. You know yourself. It seems like you know yourself pretty well, that you know when it's time to say no. And I think that that's important for your, to stick true to your values, but also be open-minded. And you were being open-minded. But unfortunately, in this case, it didn't.
And you have to realize there's not a huge money in this either. I mean, a lot of that doesn't pay well, this type of job. If you look at my friends who are just like boring accountants or a dentist, whatever normal, regular job you see out in the world, they were like, what are you doing? Are you nuts? Like, you're making like 50 paintings for something that's ultimately like, it doesn't even pay your, but that's again, if you start thinking like this is down a dark road. You start become greedy. It's the Gollum, right? You're like, gonna be, my friend, and you start to get all the evil stuff starts to rise up. Where if you keep it light, and if you keep it about the love, and if you get the right people that you can trust, and with some of the people I've worked now the 20th time together, and they just know, we know what they expect of each other, and that kind of report is priceless, because they can quickly do a shorthand and go, oh, remember what you did there, and they're like, okay, yeah, no problem, sorry, I thought we're doing more this way. Or but it also helps that for most of the classics, I know the film better than a lot of the critics that come in, who have now, they're hired to have a very informed and very great cultural discussion about this for the booklet, but they're kind of discovering this and they're drawing their conclusion. I've lived with this movie for 20 years, or often it's me who's put out the first artwork. In terms of the Japanese work, it's often that I'm for sure the only foreigner who's done the most Japanese posters in the history of movie posters. There's no foreigner who's ever done more. I've done like 600 Japanese movie posters. But so this love, I'm now starting to feel come back. A lot of creative people that are writing for Cinema Jumpo and all these like old institutions that are now, so they're starting to recognize, and they're like writing to me and they're like, Tony, I think you're the first guy who ever painted Kuniya Tanaka from First Westerner. Nobody's painted him before. And I'm like, I realized like, yeah, that's probably true. Why would they? These movies have never come out here. And so that's a super thrill that in Japan, I have a complete different standing than in the West already. You're regarded, obviously in your own country, you're never regarded well. I don't work in Germany, for example. Tons of great labels here. Zero. And it's maybe I don't put out that vibe. I had some requests for the Mechanic recently where I'm like, oh yeah, Mechanic, man, that's a dream job. That's totally my work. Bronson and stuff. And then it sort of ends up in a weird miscommunication where I feel much more comfortable with the American producers, for example. I don't know. That's something that comes from there. There's no lost in translation where I feel like I'm German. I should know these guys. I know what they're doing. I know the movie, and it somehow just was a miscommunication. So it's weird and interesting, and like you said, wild times. We got to all be grateful that a lot of stuff is coming out. That's the coolest thing, and hopefully and thankfully for you guys podcast and supporting this and getting this out there, because I feel there's a mini renaissance happening like it did in vinyl, where everybody said, oh, we're all buying CDs, we're all buying things. And no, actually there's never been more vinyl out there getting lovely restored with new cover art, and great stuff is happening, and that should be celebrated rather than holding to any kind of purist. Like you said, if you're not into it, there's other stuff for you, but we're into this stuff and we're celebrating this, and with all its little pitfalls. In general, I think it's like 80% of cool shit. I have some big gripes when it comes to the digital stuff. And not because I hate digital at all. I think it's, like you said, another tool, a modern tool that should be
Yeah.
used and exploited. But what I really hate is when it's used to fake oldiness, old painting, old oil paint. Now we're
Yeah.
getting into a proper problem for me where I'm like, okay, you're tracing these things off the iPad, which has this unique idea. Often people do mixed media, even they scan something, but they then enhance it through another layer, which is awesome. It gives its own flavor, but you have to be, in order to be appreciated by me, you have to be very authentic. Whether you do the movie, who you are, because that's our currency as it used to be as artists, or now as illustrators. And I feel as soon as you start adding little brush marks and speckles and you're trying to achieve an oil painting, I'm like, in my book, you're already down a couple of pages. Why are you faking oil painting? And then I had some, like you said, where I discovered some not so nice people, is when I've tried to raise these things in a professional manner, because I was always like, if we don't talk about this, we're going to get more of it, instead of this has to be talked about, and the difference have to be sort of explained, not in a nasty way, but in a very open discussion. But a lot of hurt people came out right away. They felt I was attacking. I was like, okay, maybe I'm not using the right language here. But if we don't talk about it, we're sort of losing that movie poster that everybody's like, why aren't the movie posters looking like they used to look? It's because you are not speaking up about what the difference is. The people that create this should say something. And like I said, it's not a lack of talented people. Even in the digital field, there's people I love. I'm like, wow, this stuff is mind-blowing, especially in the gaming realm. I'm like, I'm seeing stuff, but they're completely authentic in using those tools. And they're not faking an Anselm Richard Anselm painting or Tom Jung painting. They're not doing speckle and burnt edges, and that to me is jarring. And I'm always the most low, I think, is when people don't see the difference, when people are just like, look at this, and I'm like, this is where I feel sort of let down and a little bit disappointed that the eye is changing, people's eyes, and what they're willing to let pass. That's a little bit sad. That's where I think I'm the most frustrated at. But there's hope everywhere. I think the fact that people even bemoaning this in a large way, that we hold these iconic posters so true to us, and we're like, we want these to live on, or these live on in our minds much more than often the movies do. That's something we have to get back to. And some people really want that. They're like, I'm always often surprised how many of the creators themselves, the directors, have no opinion about the poster. They're like, let's give it to an agency.
Yeah,
And
there's
I'm like,
there's very few.
wow.
Like I notice, and I don't know, you haven't done anything, I think, for this director for his movie, but I noticed you did the cover of the book for Quentin Tarantino's novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And
Yeah,
so,
I have a complicated relationship with Tarantino. Completely in love with him in the 90s, and then hate him now. Like a passionate burning hate. Like his podcast, I had to turn off so many times. I was throwing it against the wall. I'm like, you never talk about Kabuchi again. You have no clue what you're talking about. And this has to be qualified. Obviously, we're super grateful to Tarantino, especially as a movie lover. I think we all owe him a great debt. Especially bringing some. I don't think if it wasn't for Jim Jarmusch or Quentin Tarantino, I would have never seen a Saizun Suzuki Branded to Kill, or maybe not never, but they definitely open up avenues that were unknown to me. So I can never. It's more I'm so stilted and bitter and hateful, resentful, because I used to love him so much, and that's sort of. I think that burns a lot deeper. But like you said, there's somebody who holds up cinema culture and the discussion about movies. It's even more important than his movies now, I think.
It's good to, your relationship right there with, just in this case with Tarantino, is I think a healthy relationship. It's okay to really respect somebody's work and like a lot of it, but then not like a lot of it.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you hate them or that you're trying to cancel them, which is a thing that happens a lot with people that don't like something these days. They try to say they shouldn't do anything because I don't like this one thing. So I think that that's a healthy relationship, right there, where you can still like somebody, but not like everything that they do. And,
exactly.
And like their art, especially art is different from who they are as a person. And like you said, Tarantino, though you don't like all his stuff, he's been so integral to keeping a lot of them old school ways of doing things, whether it's the art, shooting on film, even just reminding us about film from the past through his original works is an
Yeah,
important thing
and
he does.
I was gonna say even with his the New Beverly,
Right.
having the film projectors and not having digital projectors, something as minute as that, trying to keep that format alive, and also showing all kinds of you know, archival, older, curated films there and whatnot, and kind of keeping that alive. He's probably done a lot for film education in like kind of mainstream society because he's gotten so popular. People know him, know his name,
Yeah, and his passion
his
has
interviews.
infected me for sure in a great deal when it was a lot of older people talking about movies in certain way from the British Film Institute, and they would bring up Mitsuguchi and Ozu, and it was very hollowed halls, and you kind of listen. And then you have on the positive other end, you have somebody like Christopher Frayling, who's the best example of somebody who's a complete king of knowledge and wisdom, understanding, but he doesn't bring his overbearing horseshit personality into it like Tarantino often does, where he's defending a lot of points. And I'm the same. A lot of hyperbole, a lot of bullshit talking, and when you talk like that, a lot of dumb stuff comes out along with the wisdom that you pass out. And sort of when people reject him, I think it's often his personality, not what he's saying. What he's saying is all awesome. I discovered so many movies through him, but I also, now getting older, found like, oh, I know a little bit more about you than you do in this field. And that's been thanks to him, I've been able to step up my game. So I never want to say this, but I've had some personal run-ins. I don't want to say any more about that, but it's like there's an experience where I perceived his career going wrong, and I would never have anybody want to talk about my work like this. I would feel completely hurt, obviously, and I would be sad that I couldn't fulfill what you liked about it anymore. And Woody Allen often mentioned that in his movies. I like his older, funnier work. It would always come up when in his later work, when people, that's the one thing you hear, and you're like, yeah, well, when I did Bananas, it was a different guy than I did it Annie Hall. And so it's stupid to judge like this. His is a journey, and if people can still love his movies, I was positively surprised by Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, although by no means perfect. And I was enraged by that Bruce Lee scene. I was completely like, almost left the theater. I was like, so bullshit. And but all these snickering. I was at a press screening, and everybody was like, oh, and they're like, I was ripping out seats trying to leave.
But that was a very controversial thing.
That was so stupid. I
in a
couldn't believe
way, it's the way what I chalk it up to, and this is just me speaking out loud, is Tarantino loves to create his own fantasy worlds, like fantasy Hollywood, like literally Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's his fantasy version of an alternate Hollywood. So I guess in his alternate Hollywood,
I
that's his
did a whole
version of Bruce
podcast
Lee.
about this. I did a whole podcast about this when I came fresh out of it. And there are lots of indicators that this is happening in Cliff's mind, that this is because as you zoom down, why I love this movie, it's some poster movie. It's so many poster references. And as you zoom down into that parking lot fight, you see the movie advertisement for Tora, which is a movie that came out later. So I'm already like, oh, I'm like reading this room. I'm like, this is a fantasy. This is not gelling up in the timeline. He's giving us clues. He knows when that movie came out. And he knows when this was supposed to be. He knows about the run-in with Gene Bell. He knows about all the history. But where I draw the big line, and what he shouldn't have crossed, is not only that I'm not a big Brad Pitt fan, and I think if you want to make that scene happen, you should have chosen another actor that we believe can beat up Bruce Lee. Of course, people can beat up Bruce Lee. I'm not like a complete sycophant like this, but Gene Bell is a very different animal than Brad Pitt. This is the true war guy, and Brad Pitt can never, no matter how many fight clubs he does, he can never embody this fighter for me. And then there's something that I completely hated, that he made fun of him. He was like, oh, I mean, he was a complete clown. It wasn't just that he beat Bruce Lee. He went the extra mile in making him like a ridiculous buffoon. Now you stepped over the line, because I thought in my mind, Tarantino as a movie lover for sure has admiration for Bruce Lee, because we all should have, like we should for Tarantino, is he paved the way for so much. But here's my personal conspiracy theory, and nobody has confirmed this yet. The reason why he put so much gall and that little vinegar dagger in there, that I felt, that true fans had felt, that his daughter felt, that anybody who loves Bruce Lee felt it, and it cannot be explained away by all these interpretations, is that Kill Bill, somehow the estate he got on the bad side of the estate because of the tracksuit in Kill Bill. And somehow there was some bad blood because of that we all don't know about. But I think it was a dagger to Bruce Lee and maybe this estate, because even when we got asked about that scene later, he was it wasn't like, oh, this is my explanation. He was really pissy about it. The way people attacked him. It's like, oh, whatever, this is what happened. And so there is just a big sort of block in that scene for me. And not that I didn't enjoy the movie, I could get rid of it and enjoy the rest of it. And I thought it was my first after Kill Bill, I sort of really hard dropped out. And I enjoyed that movie a lot more than all the other stuff that came after. Also because it didn't have Christoph Waltz, and so I have a personal distaste for his hammy work. And I thought it was more back in his LA world rather than doing straight up period pieces that he's not so good at. And I loved when he translated all this genre cinema into a contemporary LA. That worked fantastic. That was mind blowing. It was awesome seeing a blaxploitation type movie, but not falling into the pitfalls of doing a million afros and funk music. No, making a greasy hustler in 90s LA. That worked. That was fantastic. I thought it was really, really good. But also we cannot underestimate that Sally Mankey had died. And Sally Mankey, I think, was his editor. And she kind of kept him from his worst indulgences. She just made sure these things were tight and they were fast paced. And often now with the new ones, they just feel meandering and they don't tie back up. And the Hateful Eight, like they're in the cabin and then on, and this other string of stories gets introduced and leads nowhere. And it's like, it's just a shame. I expected so much more. So I left these movies always maybe like disappointed rather than hating it. But then like, the fact that he got so much adoration for those, like The Glorious Bastards is the best thing he's ever done. And I'm almost like, oh no, it's shit. That happens often to filmmakers where, they get too late the adoration, and he should have got all these accolades for his earlier movies, and it didn't happen. So they feel they have to make up something. And I've I think that led him down a little bit of this defensive track and also a little bit into the wrong instincts. But that's just, as film lovers, that's how deeply we go into these things.
I was gonna say, you can talk on and on and on about
exactly.
Like, take one idea and just go, blow it up to infinity.
But it all feeds in again into making of the art, because then when I'm asked, like I did the book cover because I saw the Simon & Schuster novel cover come out, I'm like, no, this movie deserves, it's talking so much about the authentic 60s experience, all these posters in there. And he even brought back Renato Casaro, one of my ultimate heroes, Italian poster artist he did all the classic. I mean, he's a true legend. He's still alive. And Tarantino, to his big credit, got him back out. And he's like, Renato Casaro needs to make those new posters. And they're awesome and they're authentic and they're made with pen and ink and brush. And so I was like, the book cover can't be just photos. That's dumb. That's lame. That doesn't look like a novelization of a 60s movie cover. So I did this despite me having the issues. I could still do through the artwork, find a conversation, and I loved it. And I offered it to them and it got rejected. And then they hired Paul Mann, another great poster artist that's working traditionally now. I'm sure you guys know his work. And they hired Paul Mann to do a cool cover. But I kind of felt a little bit of joy that I helped push him there, because I was like insisting on social media, like, guys, you have to, this is not good just using photos. You have to draw it. You have to paint it. And then I was probably too annoying and they used somebody else. But I got a lot of love. Brett Easton Ellis used my cover for his podcast. And so you do get that's the kind of great, how do I say, that's the thing that kind of resolves a lot of the issues, that fans still will use it and love it and use it, and that's almost the all reward that you need.
Yeah, and this all that, I think this is a good place to kind of wrap it up a little bit. But I think one of the great things about, I think a lot of the theme of this conversation has been about we worked around talking about like how though there's an openness to wanting to learn about film and stuff, there is the limitations can be beneficial. And I think with what you do, where you just have one canvas or one sheet of paper that limits you to one image that is supposed to encapsulate a whole movie, is a really unique skill, and a really skill that we should keep championing, and just love what you do, man. I love scrolling through all your art that's available to look at. It is a great, there's just, like you said, so many different styles depending on the era, and I just love that there's somebody that not only has, is able to do what you do, but also behind it. I love learning through our conversation that you're a super informed film fan. That is something that you don't always get. You don't know, you get some people that are just, they like movies, but they're not ingesting it in a way that influences
the
their art
passion is there.
necessarily. Yeah.
For those of you listening, the passion is there. If you can't hear
you can't see what we see, but yeah.
You can't see what we see, but you can definitely hear it.
Just
I think all the passion goes into the work. I think we've absentmindedly, we've gone through so many different Blu-ray announcements, so many different, 4K announcements, and at least so many of them have just been Tony's work. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
I think so much of it, and we've kind of been like, almost like
well,
used to it by now.
Well, that's why we bring them on the show so that we can.
Yeah, I wish I could give you guys a couple of nuggets that are coming out, because there's some awesome stuff coming that are already in the books. And the next year is no letdown, at least from what I can promise you. I'm booked straight through the year, and one thing gets better than the others. Others are super rare stuff. Like I said, I've worked on already for 20 years, and they're finally coming out, and we'll see who's as inflamed as me by these movies or not. But and others are just like some real crazy stuff is coming. So this year is not going to be disappointed, at least what I can promise from my little end. And thank you guys so much for the support, because again, without somebody seeing and appreciating that these are different, that these are handmade, that these are oil painted, that these are different than the digital ones, I could never go up to a label and say, hey, this is the way I want to do it. Without them actually selling, it's not working. So I love this film culture that you guys are getting out there, that this is our new. Unfortunately, they killed the cinema, and now we have to do it another way. And whether that comes back or not, we have to stay flexible. But until then, there are some special things coming that are not only in the making of them giving you some extra work, but also getting those voices back out to the people, of the actual people making it. Like Fugitive from the Past, for example, it's a recent release by Arrow. That's a film, Tomo Shida, who's never been screened outside of Japan, never. And it's one of the ultimate Japanese classics. It's ranked in Japan almost as high, if not higher sometimes, than Seven Samurai. And that's a movie that's out now. It sort of went under the radar a little bit by Arrow, and people like, it's a very it's a fascinating movie, but that's something people should absolutely seek out. It's like an all-time masterpiece. That's just sort of floating out there. A couple of people are seeing it, but it's wild.
I'm gonna definitely check it out now. Now that
you have to see it. It's mind blowing. It's
incredible. It's a great film. It is, for those of you listening, we did cover it on the show when it was announced. But it's like 3 hours long, but it's a journey of a film, and it's very, very good. And it was a film I had never heard about until it was announced, until it came out.
Right, and it's the journey into the past of a guy who's done something wrong in the war, but also all of a sudden you see like horror flashes in it. When he sees the witch, and you're like, oh, what is that? Like inverted frames and like eyes that he sees, and like it's like a wild stylistic masterpiece. And then it transforms. The latter half is like a who's done it. Like the detective comes into a story that you love. Ken Takakura comes in a very young role, and he's sort of doing a murder investigation, which is another change of pace. It's awesome.
We just talked about Kurosawa. It reminded me a lot of the structure of High and Low, whereas in the first half of that movie is the very tense, hostage standoff, really. And the second half is the police procedural takes over, and they have to, figure things out. And in the film, it deals with time in that way, where like you're getting a shift in time, a shift in perspective, and a shift in story tone, and it just does it so well.
And I find that a lot in Japanese cinema and Japanese art from Japanese comics, that you start reading and you kind of have in mind where you'd hope it would develop. And oftentimes it surpasses that. You're like, we're getting to this point where I hope, that would be cool if he did that. And it's actually even cooler because it gets resolved really quickly. And you thought what they're keeping as a mystery is often resolved right away. And you're like, okay, where do we do now? And it gives you this rush while you're watching, because now everything is possible. They're not holding this and drawing this out till the end of the movie. They're giving you the answer. And you're like, okay, now what? It's just an hour longer, this movie. What's happening? And that's a lot of the great scripts, like you talk about seppuku and that's a movie where you go, it's an ordinary life of a samurai. What can happen? And you see sort of it's jumping in time, but it's also giving you a little background of each character. And by the end, you're so invested that you're like, you're so charged with all these stories. But it's like, yeah, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, so we definitely need to try to eventually get you back, man. I think what would be amazing is maybe some of the films you're doing cover art for. Maybe we could come back and bring maybe plan to do a few of these films you're doing artwork for, and maybe talk about the films.
Yeah, great. And sort of now I had this horrible monologue out of the way about me personally. Next time we can hear a lot more of the conversation and back and forth. I think that's always like,
well,
you need to set people up all the way.
No, dude, your life is fascinating, and I could have listened to a lot more of it.
Yeah.
But I think we'll do the audience justice if we leave them in suspense for more.
Well,
stuff
it's like we're doing this in chapters. You know what I mean? Like this is chapter 1,
like a Tarantino film.
Exactly. Like an Ushida film. Like
yeah.
But yeah, I hope the end is not a police procedural. But we'll see.
Yeah. But Tony, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope that all the stuff that you want to work on, you get a chance to work on, and I might have to. I don't know if you do any requests or anything, but I might have to. If you do a request, if there was a movie I wanted artwork for.
Yeah, oftentimes I've done some. People are like, "Oh, you should do all the Peckinpahs." I'm like, "Yeah, well, I mean, I done. Look, they're here multiple. Like I've done 7 Wild Bunch posters.
I would love to pay you to do something that I've been wanting to have on my wall. Maybe if you'd be into it.
Yeah, definitely. I whenever there's an opening, I usually do anyhow. I do stuff that I'm starting a little bit with the print shop, even though that's I only do art prints because the rights issue of the posters is tricky. You shouldn't print your own poster. I know there's a huge fan poster scene out there, but if you're really working in the industry, that's not a cool practice. Yeah. So I usually have the text and the billing removed. As long as you reinterpret the art, that's fine. So an art print is okay, but you cannot sell the posters, or you shouldn't without an official license. So yeah, I'm always happy to put stuff in the shop, one-off requests that people like, and it's taking off. Unfortunately, it's all Columbo. I don't know why, but I've hit the nerve with Columbo. So
I noticed that. I didn't know if you were a big fan.
I was a huge fan, but like you said, I watched this with my grandfather, and it was sort of just in the family discussion. This was like mandatory TV back in the days. Like we all watched it as a family, was Columbo. But I've done a book. I wanted to do a book project years ago where I've done sort of all the LA locations, the different villains, so how it all connected. And I thought that would be a beautiful coffee table book through all these, and then never sort of happened. And then when some site put it out, the Columbo file or something like that, and all of a sudden this is all I can sell. Nobody wants anything different than Columbo. So, and I think during the pandemic, a lot of people, a new generation, found a sort of politically what's going on. You want to kind of have an older Italian grandfather solve all the injustices, and it sort of hit a nerve where it's like it gives you some comfort out there where wherever else we talk about is so multi-layered. Now you just down each rabbit hole.
Yeah. But that's great, man. That's great. Thank you.
Just one more thing.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
No, that was the Columbo ending. So.
Oh, okay. Well, Tony, I appreciate everything you do, and hope you have a good rest of your day. And we'll talk to you later.
Same to you guys. Bye.
Bye.